Good morning, guys. Okay, so today we're going to be working on our second page of our BFG book. It is the dodecahedron number 2. It's actually for chapters 3 and 4, so let's go ahead and read those first. First, chapter 3 is the snatch. Under the blanket, Sophie waited. After a minute or so, she lifted the corner of the blanket and peered out. For the second time that night, her blood froze to ice, and she wanted to scream. But no sound came out. There, at the window, with the curtains pushed aside, was the enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face of the giant person staring in. The flashing black eyes were fixed on Sophie's bed. The next moment, a huge hand with white, pale fingers came snaking in through the window. This was followed by an arm as thick as a tree trunk. And the arm, the hand, the fingers were reaching out across the room toward Sophie's bed. This time, Sophie really did scream, but only for a second, because very quickly the huge hand clamped down over her blanket, and the scream was smothered by the bedclothes. Sophie, crouching underneath the blanket, felt strong fingers grasping hold of her, and then she was lifted up from her bed, blanket and all, and whisked out of the window. If you can think of anything more terrifying than that happening to you in the middle of the night, then let's hear about it. The awful thing was that Sophie knew exactly what was going on, although she couldn't see it happening. She knew that a monster or a giant with an enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face and dangerous eyes had plucked her from her bed in the middle of the witching hour and was now carrying her out through the window smothered in a blanket. What actually happened next was this. When the giant had gotten Sophie outside, he arranged the blanket so that he could grasp all the four corners of it at once in one of his huge hands, with Sophie imprisoned inside. In the other hand, he seized the suitcase and the long trumpet thing, and off he ran. Sophie, by squirming around inside the blanket, managed to push the top of her head out through a little gap just below the giant's hand. She stared around her. She saw the village houses rushing by on both sides. The giant was sprinting down the high street. He was running so fast his black cloak was streaming out behind him like the wings of a bird. See? That's how he's kind of looking. And see how he's got the little blanket, all the corners just kind of holding Sophie? Each stride he took was as long as the tennis court. Out of the village he ran, and soon they were racing across the moonlit fields. The hedges dividing the fields were no problem to the giant. He simply strode over them. A wide river appeared in his path. He crossed it in one flying stride. Sophie crouched in the blanket, peering out. She was being bumped against the giant's leg like a sack of potatoes. Over the fields and hedges and rivers they went, and after a while, a frightening thought came into Sophie's head. The giant is running fast, she told herself, because he is hungry, and he wants to get home as quickly as possible, and then he'll have me for breakfast. Uh-oh. We'll just see what happens to her. Okay, chapter 4, the cave. The giant ran on, but now a curious change took place in his way of running. He seemed suddenly to go into a higher gear. Faster and faster he went, and soon he was traveling at such a speed that the landscape became blurred. The wind stung Sophie's cheeks. It made her eyes water. It whipped her head back and whistled in her ears. She could no longer feel the giant's feet touching the ground. She had a weird sensation they were flying. It was impossible to tell whether they were over land or sea. This giant had some sort of magic in his legs. The wind rushing against Sophie's face became so strong that she had to duck down again into the blanket to prevent her head from being blown away. Was it really possible that they were crossing oceans? It certainly felt that way to Sophie. She crouched in the blanket and listened to the howling of the wind. It went on for what seemed like hours. Then all at once, the wind stopped its howling. The pace began to slow down. Sophie could feel the giant's feet pounding once again over the earth. She poked her head up out of the blanket to have a look. They were in a country of thick forests and rushing rivers. The giant had definitely slowed down and was now running more normally, although normal is a silly word to use to describe a galloping giant. He leaped over a dozen rivers. He went rattling through a great forest, then down into a valley and up over a range of hills as bare as concrete. And soon he was galloping over a desolate wasteland that was not quite of this earth. The ground was flat and pale yellow. Great lumps of blue rock were scattered all around. Doesn't really sound like any place that I've ever been to or heard of. I wonder where they are. And dead trees stood everywhere like skeletons. The moon had long since disappeared, and now the dawn was breaking. Sophie still peered out of the blanket, saw suddenly ahead of her a great, craggy mountain. The mountain was dark blue, and all around it the sky was gushing and glistening with light. Bits of pale gold were flying among the delicate frost-white flakes of cloud, and over one side of the rim of the morning sun was coming up red as blood. Doesn't sound like they're here on Earth anymore. We'll have to see where he took her. Right beneath the mountain, the giant stopped. He was puffing mightily. His great chest was heaving in and out. He paused to catch his breath. Directly in front of them, lying against the side of the mountain, Sophie could see a massive round stone. It was as big as a house. The giant reached out and rolled the stone to one side, as easily if it had been a football. And now, where the stone had been, there appeared a vast black hole. The hole was so large the giant didn't even have to duck his head when he went in. He strode into the black hole, still carrying Sophie in one hand, the trumpet and the suitcase in the other. As soon as he was inside, he stopped and turned and rolled the great stone back into place, so that the entrance to his secret cave was completely hidden from outside. Now that the entrance had been sealed up, there was not a glint of light inside the cave. All was black. Sophie felt herself being lowered to the ground. Then the giant let go of the blanket completely. His footsteps moved away. Sophie sat there in the dark, shivering with fear. "He is getting ready to eat me," she told herself. "He will probably eat me raw, just as I am. Or perhaps he will boil me first, or he'll have me fried. He will drop me like a rasher of bacon into some gigantic frying pan sizzling with fat." A blaze of light suddenly lit up the whole space. Sophie blinked and stared. I wonder what this is. We'll have to see. There's a little suitcase though, and there's Sophie. So thinking about that's a suitcase that's just huge. And that's itty bitty little Sophie, who's probably about 10 years old. And then these are so huge compared to her. She saw an enormous cavern with a high rocky roof. The walls on either side were lined with shelves. And on the shelves there stood row upon row of glass jars. There were jars everywhere. They were piled up in the corners. They filled every nook and cranny of the cave. In the middle of the floor there was a table 12 feet high and a chair to match. That giant took off his black cloak and hung it against the wall. Sophie saw that under the cloak he was wearing a sort of collarless shirt and dirty old leather waistcoat that didn't seem to have any buttons. His trousers were faded green and were far too short in the legs. On his bare feet he was wearing a pair of ridiculous sandals that for some reason had holes cut along each side, with a large hole at the end where his toes stuck out. Sophie, crouching on the floor of the cave in her nightie, gazed back at him through thick steel-rimmed glasses. She was trembling like a leaf in the wind, and a finger of ice was running up and down the length of her spine. "Ha!" shouted the giant, walking forward and rubbing his hands together. "What has us got here?" His booming voice rolled around the walls of the cave like a burst of thunder. Uh-oh. So he knows that she's there, of course, because he picked her up. But then he brought her to this place. There's a whole wall of jars, which we have no idea what's in them yet. I wonder what he's going to do with her. We'll have to wait and find out for tomorrow. All right, so now we've got our dodecahedron circle talking about facts and opinion today. It says on the left side of the T-chart, so let me tilt this down a little bit so you guys can see it. There you go. So on the left side of the T-chart, write 3 facts about the novel in complete sentences. So this is something that can be proven true. If you guys remember from last couple of weeks, talking about fact versus opinion, a fact is something that can be proven, can be like, yes, 2 plus 2 equals 4. So I could have 2 objects in one hand, 2 objects in the other, put them next to each other, and now I have a total of 4 of them. An opinion is a personal view or belief. So if I said that pink is the absolute best color ever, and purple is the perfect color for a car, can I prove that? Well, not really. Purple might be my favorite color for my car, and pink might be some other person's favorite color, but it's not an actual quantitative, you can count this, you can touch this, you can see this, you can prove this about that object. So on this side, we're going to be writing our opinion about the novel. So something that you like, something you dislike, something you thought was cool, something that you thought that, that would never really happen, versus a fact. That's on our left side of the page. So our facts are the ones that can be proven. I'm going to go ahead and start you off with the first fact, but everything else you're going to have to fill in, okay? Because the opinions I can't give you, because that would be my opinion, not your opinion. But the first fact is really, really easy. If we look at the front of my book, right? The BFG, illustrated by Quentin Blake and written by Ronald Dahl. That's who the big title up here on the front is. Well, we can say who it was written by, right? Yeah, that one you can prove as a fact. It was written by this person. So, on fact number 1, we're going to go ahead and write his name. So, we can put the BFG was written by Roald Dahl. And be careful of the spelling. Remember, if it's a proper noun, a name, needs capital first and last name. Be careful of the spelling, because otherwise that isn't his name, okay? So the BFG was written by Roald Dahl, period. Can that be proven? Yes, it can. It can be proven because Roald Dahl was the person who wrote it. He was the one that said, you know what? I think this story is going to be great, and I'm going to write it down. So we can look up at the front of this book. It says Roald Dahl is the writer. Same thing, if we check our inside pages, Roald Dahl is the writer again. Or if you check this page, so the inside with the credits, you can also find, okay, written by so-and-so, published by so-and-so, and so on. These are things that can be proven because they are guaranteed to be, okay? So that is the fact, your first fact that I've given you about the novel. You're going to have to give me 2 more, and you're going to have to give me 3 things that you have an opinion about the story so far. So, small suggestion, you might tell me if you like the story, if you don't, if you think it's scary, if you think it's not, if you think that they're still in London, which is where they started, or if you think they're somewhere else, or any of those kind of things would be great to add to this chart, okay? So make sure you fill those in, add a picture for me on Class Dojo, and I will see you guys next time. All right, bye guys.